I'm not sure I can convey to you what I went through several weeks ago, but I'll try. I work a swing shift, so my hours are very odd. One morning, at about 3 a.m. or so, I was lying in bed watching television, still an hour or so from my usual bedtime. I reached for the remote and, for a lack of a better way to put it, I fell asleep. The strange thing is, I was not yet sleepy and didn't drift off to sleep like I normally would. Actually, it would be better explained if I said, I passed out. The next thing I remember, someone was shaking me awake as I slept in the lobby of a kind of trade school. I knew who I was, why I was there, and I knew the person who was waking me up. I was apparently in this school taking a welder's class. I had the afternoon classes, but decided to leave early. Everything was fine until I walked outside and asked a friend what time it was. When she said 11:30, something about it just didn't seem right, as I realised I wasn't in the right place. I then suddenly became very groggy and felt like I was going to pass out. I even thought, this is just a dream, but it was much more than that. Everything was real. I could feel the gravel under my feet, feel the breeze against my body. At one point I smelled garbage. I then realised that the wind was blowing from the direction of a large dumpster. I don't think I can emphasize just how real it was, other than to say, think about how you feel right now. That's what this felt like. I could see, touch, smell. I was there, living what was my life, but not my life. I was extremely groggy, but kept fighting it. Actually, I was afraid to pass out, not really certain that I would wake up again. I'll try to make the rest of this brief, but I'm not sure I can. If I told the entire story, it might go on for some time. In this dream, my memory was a little like Swiss cheese. I knew some things about my life here, but not everything. It seemed that I knew everyday things, like why I was at the school and people I came in contact with every day, but not things that would be general knowledge, or things that a person wouldn't consciously think about day to day. I have a cousin that lives here, and in my dream he lived nearby the school. He was married in the dream like he is in real life, but they lived in an apartment instead of a house, and also did not yet have a baby. He could immediately tell something was wrong by the look on my face. I tried to tell him what was happening, and he was skeptical at first, but as I kept talking he started to believe me. With his help and the help of a friend, we figured out some differences between my two worlds. Several people I know either did not exist or never moved to the area. At least neither of them knew who they were when I mentioned their names. I know that at least one of them did not exist at all. I brought up the name of two brothers we all know. They knew the oldest, but told me he was an only child. I have since talked to the oldest of the brothers about this, and he told me that he remembered his parents argued for a long time about having another child. She wanted one, and he didn't. They were both adamant about their position, but in the end he gave in, and they had the second child. There were several other small differences, and there were many things that were much the same. The largest difference, however, was the town that we lived in. In real life, I live in a small town called Nakona. In my dream, Nakona didn't even exist, and we all lived in a town called Yancey. Another larger city to the east is Gainesville, which also didn't exist. From what I could tell, Yancey was approximately where Gainesville should have been. Many things in Yancey were like a combination of Nakona and Gainesville. For instance, the water tower was exactly like the one in Nakona, with the high school mascot's name on it. Of course, the one in my dream said Yancey instead of Nakona. I have done some research and found that the only reason Nakona exists today is because some landowners allowed the railroad to be built running across their land. If they had have said no, the railroad would have gone further south. I also found a prominent lawyer and judge from the Gainesville area named Yancey Lewis. Apparently he was quite successful and popular during his time. All in all, this experience lasted about 2 hours, and unlike most dreams, it didn't jump around from one time to the next. If I walked somewhere that took 6 minutes to get there, it took 6 minutes. Eventually, in the dream, my cousin talked me into lying down, telling me I looked like walking death. And when I woke up, I was back in my world, in my own bed. Oddly enough, it was 11:30 a.m. For the first couple of hours, I was just in a kind of a daze. I chuckle now because the first thing I did was get the local newspaper from the living room to make sure it said Nakona instead of Yancey. Again, I don't think I can explain just how real it all was, other than to say, I was there. Another story, very similar to this one, has made the rounds through various paranormal forums. You may have heard Lina Garcia's story before. She is a Spanish woman who claims that she, or her mind at least, is from an alternate dimension, that she woke up in our dimension, as James from the last story woke up in some other dimension. Here is Lorina's story for anyone who has not heard it. Hello, my name is Luz. I am 41 years old and I think I jumped into a parallel universe. I find it hard to tell this story because I am sure no one will believe me. One day I went to bed, and when I woke up, everything was different. There was no time travel or anything like that. I woke up in the same year and the same day I went to bed, but many things were different. Little things, but important enough to notice. If this is a dream, then you are all in this dream, as I write this here. So if someone replies, then you are living in the same reality as me, be it my dream or not. 4 months ago, I woke up to a normal morning. I was in my rental house where I lived for 7 years. Everything was the same except for the sheets on my bed. They were different, but I didn't give it too much thought at the time. Later that morning I drove to my office where I have worked for the last 20 years, but when I got there, it was not my office. All the offices have names on the doors, and my name was not there. I thought I had the wrong floor, but no, it was my floor. I went to my office wireless area, and I looked for my name. I was still working there, but I was in another department, reporting to a director who I did not even know. So, I went to the office to mark the directory, and I said I was sick, and I left. Everything in my portfolio was the same. My cards, my ID, all the same. But I do not remember having changed departments at any time. I went to medical insurance, and they tested me for drugs and alcohol. Everything came back clean. I went to work the next day, and my colleagues asked me if I was feeling okay. I just told them that I've been out of step. My apartment has not changed, it's all the same. I have looked at all the papers that I keep in the house, and everything is the same. I started to think that something must be wrong with me. I thought maybe it was some kind of amnesia, as if I had missed a portion of my life. But no, I went online, and it was the day it should be, and the news was as I remembered from the previous day. 6 months ago I left my partner of 7 years. We broke up, and I started a new relationship with a guy in my neighbourhood. I know him well. I've been with him for over 4 months and know his name, address, where he works, and where he studies, and that he has a child. Well, now there is no trace of this guy. It seems that he existed before I jumped, but now there is no trace of him. I even hired a detective to look for him. My ex-boyfriend is now with me. It seems I never left him. And Augustine, my boyfriend before I jumped, seems to have never existed here. He doesn't live in the apartment where he used to live, nor can I find his son. I went to a psychiatrist and she attributed this to stress and believed it to be some sort of hallucination, but I know it's not. There are many little things I've noticed in the past 5 months that are different, like clothes in my closet that I did not buy. My own family does not remember certain things like the surgery on my sister's shoulder a couple of months ago. Apparently there never was an operation. Unfortunately, I do not remember many important things in the news, but the rest of the world seems to be the same. There are some interesting similarities between these two stories. It reminds me very much of a book I read a long time ago called Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. Monroe was a proficient astral traveller, and in the book he describes how he started visiting an alternate physical universe, which he called Locale 3. He talks of how he discovered an alternate version of himself and was able to merge with and control this other physical body. The following is some excerpts from the book. Locale 3, in summary, proved to be a physical matter world almost identical to our own. The natural environment is the same. There are trees, houses, cities, people, artifacts, and all the trappings of a reasonably civilized society. There are homes, families, businesses, and people work for a living. There are roads on which vehicles travel, and there are railroads and trains. Monroe goes on to say that this alternative world is neither the future nor the past of our world, that in this world there are no electrical devices, no electrical lights, radios, televisions, or electric power of any kind. Also, there is no fossil fuels or internal combustion motors. Instead, they use steam power, as in the following description. Careful examination of one of the locomotives that pulled a string of old-fashioned looking passenger carriages showed it to be driven by a steam engine. The carriages appeared to be made of wood, the locomotive of metal, but of a different shape than our now obsolete types. The track gauge was much smaller than our standard track spacing, smaller even than our narrow gauge mountain railways. I observed the servicing of one of the locomotives in detail. Neither wood nor coal was used as a thermal source to produce steam. Instead, large vat-like containers were carefully slid from under the boiler, detached, and rolled by a small cart into a building with massive thick walls. The containers had pipe-like protuberances extending from the top. Men working behind shields performed the removal, casually cautious, and did not relax their automatic vigilance until the containers were safely in the building and the door was closed. The contents were hot, either through heat or radiation. The actions of the technicians all seemed to indicate the latter. In the book, further details are given describing this alternative world, but for the purpose of this video, I will skip ahead to where Monroe describes his alternate self. During the initial stages of his exploration into this dimension, he was moving about the world in astral form. The major discovery came soon after I gathered enough courage for extended expeditions into Locale 3. In spite of early indications, the people there were not aware of my presence until I met and merged temporarily and involuntarily with one who can only be described as the I who lives there. The only explanation I can think of is that I, fully conscious of living and being here, was attracted to and began momentarily to inhabit the body of a person there, a person much like myself. When this took place, and it began to be an automatic process when I went to Locale 3, I simply took over his body. There was no awareness of his mental presence when I temporarily displaced him. My knowledge of him and his activities and his past came from his family, and what was evidently his brain memory bank. Though I knew that I was not he, I could feel objectively the emotional patterns of his past. I have wondered what embarrassment I have caused him as a result of the periods of amnesia created by my intrusions. Some must have brought him much distress. This is a very similar description to the sensations James from the first story had. James was fully aware that he was James, but it seems he could glean information from the brain or the memory bank of the alternate James. My theory is that James was astral travelling and involuntarily visited an alternate Earth, and then merged with the alternate James involuntarily as Monroe described. It's the same situation with Lina Garcia, except in reverse. However, she seems to be stuck here permanently. This raises many questions for me, and could also be a clue as to what true reality is.
Yeah.